If nothing else, we here at America Decides know how to count and read a map. So here you go. 41 days to Election Day. Not incidentally, voting has already begun in some states. Vice President Harris was in Pittsburgh today. Former President Trump in North Carolina. The Vice President unveiled new economic proposals in her fourth trip to Western Pennsylvania since launching her campaign. Trump pushed, as you might expect, his America First agenda, doing so at a plumbing manufacturing plant just outside of Charlotte, his second visit to North Carolina in the last 5 days. And we are learning about renewed threats and assassination plots against the former president from Iran. Trump and his campaign have been briefed on this topic by U.S. intelligence officials. That is where we start tonight. And our Scott MacFarlane joins us from Capitol Hill. Scott, catch us up on the latest regarding Iran and these threats.
Yeah, the Trump campaign confirms and actually reported first last night that their team and the former president have been briefed by the Office of Director of National Intelligence about potential Iranian plots to assassinate him and to destabilize American politics at this inflection point with about a month and a half until Election Day. This comes after 2 assassination attempts over the past 2.5 months, but there's been no indication of any connective tissue whatsoever between those 2 attempts and Iran. But it also is not happening in a vacuum, is it, Major? It's happening amid this concern the U.S. Secret Service needs more money, needs more manpower, needs better equipment, better training, better communications to deal with these threats against Donald Trump and their other protectees. And one note from a newly issued U.S. Senate report, came out at 5 a.m. Eastern time today, that there was intelligence received just ahead of Donald Trump's Butler rally about a possible threat, a destabilizing threat. The July 13th Butler rally, Major, was the first one involving a post-president Donald Trump in which he got a counter-sniper team assigned. That counter-sniper team in Butler, Pennsylvania, may very well have saved his life and many other lives that day. There may be some connective tissue between the deployment of that counter-sniper team July 13th and the threats being received ahead of time.
Scott, I know you have an interview with one of the lawmakers most interested in boosting funding for the Secret Service. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to play for our audience some sound from former President Trump today about what he regards as maybe a lack of emphasis by the Biden administration to Iran about the threats around him and what he might do if he were similarly positioned. Let's listen.
If I were the president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and the country itself to smithereens. We're going to blow it to smithereens. You can't do that.
Scott, are those sentiments shared in any way that you can detect on Capitol Hill by Trump-supporting Republicans?
What we heard out of Trump-supporting Republicans today on this topic was about the need to more robustly protect Donald Trump. They're making this argument that he needs the same level of protection he would have had when he was president and that President Biden enjoys right now. And to a degree, that argument is succeeding. The U.S. House, as the evening began here in Washington, passed a spending bill that includes more than $200 million for the Secret Service to better protect its protectees. What's more, a bill to make equal the protections given to presidential candidates and the president passed overwhelmingly, unanimously in the U.S. House, and then unanimously, by unanimous consent, in the U.S. Senate. Something passing unanimously this close to an election is unheard of. So there seems to be some unanimity to the need and the idea here that there is a need to get more protection for Donald Trump, Vice President Harris, and the other protectees in this moment of potential international interference. Take a listen to one of the sponsors of the House bill, Mike Lawler, first-term Republican from New York.
It ensures that the Secret Service provide the same level of protection for the former president as they do for President Biden, which, given the fact that either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris is going to be president of the United States come January, it is imperative that we ensure their safety and well-being and that the same level of protective detail is provided, especially after President Trump was a victim of not one but 2 assassination attempts.
And Major, let me just button up a few loose threads here. The defendant in that alleged second assassination attempt, Ryan Ruth, appears in court Monday to face formal charges. And oh, by the way, Donald Trump has on the schedule a trip back to Butler, Pennsylvania, October 5th.
Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill. Thank you, as always. Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes join us now. Robert is in Mint Hill, North Carolina. Nancy is in Pittsburgh. So, Nancy, I want to start with you. Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, yet again for Vice President Harris. Not only an emphasis geographically, but there's some new economic proposals that were distributed today. Tell us about those.
Right. So she talked about wanting to promote innovation in manufacturing, but her main focus here in Pittsburgh, in this battleground state major, was her overarching economic philosophy, trying to lay out for a public that is still learning about her and her proposals exactly how she would address economic challenges as president of the United States. So she argued that she is a pragmatist, that she would not be guided by ideology alone, and that she would take great ideas from all corners. Essentially, Major, what she's trying to do is peel off the labels that Donald Trump has been trying to stick on her, that she's a socialist, that she's a capitalist. He even called her yesterday a tax queen. She's arguing that she actually wants to cut taxes for the middle class, that she wants to provide more assistance to startup businesses, to people who are trying to buy their first home. And she's arguing that she isn't guided by liberal principles solely when it comes to the economy, that she'll take ideas, if they're good ones, wherever they come from, and that she will commit to trial and error until she gets it right.
Robert Costa, turning to you in North Carolina. The Trump message on the economy, not only trying to label Kamala Harris, but saying there has already been a certain amount of trial and error.
Major, great to be with you from the battleground, North Carolina. I was covering former President Donald Trump earlier today at a manufacturing site outside of Charlotte in the Charlotte region. And it's evident that he's coming back to his core themes from the 2016 campaign and the 2020 campaign in this final stretch in 2024. He's talking about economic nationalism, about putting forward tariffs on American corporations who choose to move abroad for manufacturing or for any kind of business purpose, and having punitive tariffs be at the core of his economic argument. And it's winning some support, especially among Republicans in North Carolina and elsewhere, who like to see that Trump-style economic approach taken, not just to talk about tax cuts, but to talk about appealing to working voters by putting trade front and center. And that's what makes Trump so different than most traditional Republicans who usually would only talk about extending the Trump tax cut. Trump sees an opportunity to cut into the Democratic base, especially among union members in the South and the industrial Midwest, by focusing once again on trade.
And Robert, we talk frequently with you and enjoyably about your life growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. I know this is not necessarily your bailiwick, but I just want to know what you think about or what the Trump campaign regards as Harris's emphasis on Western Pennsylvania.
Harris knows that, and this is based on my conversations with her advisors and her top strategists, that she needs enormous turnout in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh because there is an expectation on the Democratic side that Trump's going to get big turnout in Western Pennsylvania. By focusing on things like antitrust issues, going after big corporations, by talking about not taxing on tips, echoing the Trump position, by talking about working people, locking arms with union leaders like Shawn Fain and others, Harris is trying to make sure that Trump's not going to walk away with that quiet, centrist union vote in places like Western Pennsylvania. So her going to Western Pennsylvania isn't some kind of belief that she's going to win all regions in Pennsylvania, especially that one, but that she needs to counter Trump on immigration, on the economy in that part of the state. Because if she can run up the score in Philadelphia and keep him relatively muted and soft in some counties in Western Pennsylvania, especially those collars around Pittsburgh, then she can win the state. And it's very hard when you talk to Harris people for her to have a map to the White House that doesn't run through Pennsylvania. And if it doesn't run through Pennsylvania, it's going to almost have to run through North Carolina and Georgia. And that's why you see such an emphasis on those states as well.
Nancy, turning to you about another question of geography. The vice president is considering, we are led to believe, a visit to the U.S.-Mexico border.
She is, and believe it or not, Major, this would be her first visit to the border since 2021. This has always been a sticky issue for her. Obviously, Republicans are going after her on this issue now. Our polling shows that she trails Trump by double digits when it comes to handling of immigration. But she's going into the belly of the beast. She's going to be holding a campaign event near the border in Arizona on Friday. And she's going to argue that actually the number of border crossings has dropped sharply in the past few months since the Biden administration, of which she is a part, imposed a tough new asylum policy. And she's going to argue that it was actually Trump who brought an end to what would have been a major bipartisan achievement on Capitol Hill, a big new compromise immigration bill. And so it'll be very interesting to watch the optics and also to listen to what she has to say in Arizona as she works to diffuse something that has been really one of her biggest and most difficult issues to tackle on the campaign trail.
And Robert, picking up on that point, economics and immigration seem to be the core messages as Trump looks toward the finish line.
There's no doubt about it. And as you know, Major, there's such a history of this in both parties and seeing how these issues are intertwined, because when you go to a union hall, as you have many times and I have many times, you often meet workers who say that immigration levels, put aside undocumented migrants, legal immigration levels, many workers have told me in the past few decades, they would like to see them limited in some way, capped or lowered, because the idea among many working Americans that you're in any way increasing the working population, especially for some of these industrial jobs, that's competition. They want to make sure they're not facing more competition in a tough economic atmosphere. So that's why immigration and the economy in places like North Carolina and Western Pennsylvania and all parts of the country are so often linked together, because working people those are the real swing voters, in my view, this time around. They link those issues. They don't see them as kind of a separate front. They don't see the discussion about the border as some kind of individual singular policy fight. It's part of the economic fight and how they feel economic pain and how they cast responsibility for it, whether it's positive or negative.
Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes, as always, thank you very much. And a quick programming note. Join us here on CBS News 24/7 early. And by early, I mean 4 p.m. Eastern on October 1st for our special vice presidential debate edition of America Decides live from New York. CBS News, as you might have heard, will moderate the only vice presidential debate, and we will bring you coverage on that debate all evening long.